Well, hello and welcome to our First Intuition ACCA Practical Experience Requirement Seminar. My name is Ben Bullman. I am a tutor and a director at First Intuition. My background was being an ACCA student many years ago, so I actually went through the practical experience requirements when I applied for membership. Subsequently, I went on to be a training manager for some students, so worked as their workplace mentor supervisor for their practical experience requirement. And I'm now a tutor and director at FI, so dealing with students on a day-to-day basis and getting lots of questions around the requirements for practical experience to get your ACCA certificate. But I am joined this afternoon by Gordon Smith from the ACCA, who's going to do a presentation for us on the up-to-date requirements of their PER. So I'm going to say good afternoon to Gordon. Hello, Gordon.
Hi Ben, thanks for introducing me. My name's Gordon. I'm a Sectors and Communities Manager for ACCA, and I've got a presentation today which will last about 30 minutes. Hopefully it will answer all your questions, but if not, then we will have time for some questions later on. I am aware I have a Scottish accent and it might not be quite what you were expecting. I will try to tone down the Glaswegian and talk slowly, but a lot of this stuff can be a little bit complicated. So if I don't get through anything, then please just let me know. Today then, what we'll cover, we'll start by taking a look at some of the benefits of ACCA membership. We'll then do an overview of the Practical Experience Requirement Policy, PER, talking about how you record your time in a relevant role, talking about performance objectives, practical experience supervisors, what's their role, who can be your supervisor. We'll talk a bit about approved employers, and if we have time, we'll touch on the ethics and professional skills module before finishing off by thinking about how to plan your PER, the resources we have available, the next steps, and then answering some of your questions. So the first question is, why do we bother? What is the point of getting through, doing the qualification, doing the PER, and getting through to ACCA membership? Well, first and foremost, by doing that, you will be a fully qualified professional accountant. You'll be part of a very large and diverse body. We've got over 219,000 members across the world, 181 countries. And this global presence means that we can drive change in the accountancy sector by advising governments, organisations, regulators on what members want. We achieve this by working with our members. So as an ACCA member, you'll be helping to shape the future of the accountancy profession. It will also help open doors with employers. Employers across the globe seek out ACCA trained professionals because they know ACCA members have the strategic thinking, technical skills, and the professional values that they need. And in a recent survey, 86% of employers agreed the ACCA members are the complete finance professional. Hopefully then now I've convinced you that the PER is important. We'll move on then to a quick overview of the PER policy. Hopefully you know this, but there are 3 parts to becoming an ACCA member: exams, ethics, and experience, and they're all equally important. So why is PER important? Why do we make you achieve it? Well, practical experience is a really important part of the ACCA qualification because it shows employers that you can apply the knowledge and the techniques gained through your studies in the workplace. A good knowledge of theory is really very important, but practical application in the real world is the bit that employers really value. So as an example, some of you will have passed your driving test. You need to pass your theory test first before you're allowed to attempt the practical test. Now, personally, I breezed through the theory test and then failed the practical test by driving the wrong way up a dual carriageway. I knew in theory how to drive up a dual carriageway or drive on a dual carriageway, but in a real world situation, I got it wrong because there was lots of other stuff happening. There was distractions, there was pressure, there was someone in my ear talking. It was a different situation, a different scenario, and it becomes easier to make those mistakes. So by doing the ACCA PER, you'll be showing that you have experience in those kind of situations and you won't do something like whatever the accountancy equivalent of driving the wrong way up a dual carriageway on a test is. Professional ethics is also part of the ACCA qualification. It's covered within the exams and within the PER, as well as the ethics and professional skills module. Firstly then, what is the PER? There's two key elements to this. Firstly, you'll need to achieve 36 months of supervised experience in a relevant accounting and finance role, and also you'll have to demonstrate you have achieved a set of performance objectives. You have to record this in the online PER recording tool, which is called My Experience, and you can get it through your My ACCA account. So let's take a look at the time requirement first. To complete the PER, you'll need to achieve 36 months of supervised work experience in one or more relevant accounting and finance roles. So that brings the question, well, what is a relevant role? We would consider a relevant role to be a role where your time is spent on accounting, finance, or audit and assurance tasks, or other technical specialisms such as taxation, insolvency, forensics, management accounting, anything like that. Those would be considered to be relevant roles. You don't need to get your experience continuously or in one single role. You can use your experience at different times, different roles as part of your PER. Even before you became an ACCA student, if it was at the right level, you can still use it. And you can also use experience gained in part-time or voluntary work and internships. That's quite useful for people who are just starting out and trying to get their first job in accountancy. So it doesn't really matter what sector or organisation you work in, you can still gain your PER as long as your role is relevant. And if it's not fully relevant, even if it's partially relevant, it can still count. If, for example, you spend 50% of your time in accounting and finance tasks, you can still use this experience. You would just accrue the time more slowly. So in that example, you would gain 6 months of PER in a 12-month period. The main thing to remember here is that all these types of experience can count, but they must be supervised by a qualified accountant. And this is absolutely key. If you're not supervised, for example, if you're a self-employed bookkeeper, the experience will not count as part of your PER because you're not having it supervised.
Can I just chip in there, Gordon, and just stress something very relevant for our students, the fact that time before registration with the ACCA can count. I know a number of our students maybe found their job and started working before they signed up and studied with the ACCA, and a number of them might have done another qualification alongside their workplace experience before they then claimed exemptions and moved in. So all of that time counts. I'm thinking about anyone that's an AAT student first that then went into ACCA, that time can also be recorded.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have a look at what is involved in the performance objectives, you'll be able to gauge whether or not you think that the work that you did was at the right level for that to count. If you think it was, then absolutely great, use that. It might be you might have trouble getting in touch with your previous supervisor, but again, if that's not an issue for you, then definitely use it. We'll move on then to look at how you record your employment in the recording tool. This is the dashboard. When you log into My Experience, this is what you'll see. It's an overview of your PER, your most recent employment information, and the amount of time that you have accrued towards your 36 months across all the relevant roles. And this is based on the information that you have entered onto your My Experience tool. It doesn't pull from anything else within ACCA's infrastructure. It will also show you an overview of the performance objectives you've started working on and what their status is. So when you want to start recording your experience, you will need to add details of your employer and then your role. And on the next slide, I've got the screen where you'll add your role information. It asks for job title and start date, as you would expect, the average hours you work per week and the percentage relevance of your role, as we talked about earlier. And this will take all of those roles and record and calculate it all automatically. So you don't have to do it manually. I know you can all do 50% relevance of a year, but you don't even need to. It will do it all for you. If you're currently in a role, just leave the end date blank and your time will just keep accruing each month until you get to either an end date or you get to the 36 months. The pie chart above will show the progress that you're going towards the 36 months objective. And when you hit the 36 months, or when you add an end date to a role, maybe if you're moving job, then you'll see a message reminding you to submit your time to your supervisor and get it signed off. And that's an important point, because getting it signed off at the time means that you don't have to go back to it later on if maybe in a few years' time the person who was your line manager has moved on from that employment. Maybe it doesn't even exist anymore as in that form. Maybe you've left on bad terms. Let's hope not. But there are many reasons why it might be difficult to go back after you've left and get that employment. So I would suggest going in and getting it as soon as you know that you're moving the job. You can add in all the relevant roles that you've got, which you're using towards your PER as well. Moving on to talk about the performance objectives, you will need to achieve 9 of these in total, and these are how you demonstrate your performance in the workplace. They'll set the minimum standard of work that you're expected to achieve, and they describe the kind of work activities that you might carry out. If you've ever taken part in an appraisal process at work, then you might find that these are similar to the objectives that you're given by your employer. I like thinking of them as almost a set of interview questions. At some point, you'll be going for an interview and you'll be asked to give a time when you've done a particular thing or you've demonstrated a particular ability. And for those ones, it's good to have this kind of stuff already waiting for you. The objectives and the exams are closely linked, so the knowledge and the techniques you develop through your studies are relevant to the workplace. And the tasks and activities that you have to do are related to the type of work that we would expect you to be doing on a regular basis in an accounting or a finance role. These are the essentials. These are essential fundamental business skills that all accountants require. So every ACCA trainee will need to achieve all 5 of these objectives. You don't have to be at a particularly high level to get these objectives. Don't think that because you're not a CFO, you can't get the leadership and management objective, or because you're not in charge of the strategy, you can't get the strategy and innovation objective. Have a look at the performance objective breakdown, and you should be able to see tasks in that you are carrying out. There are also technical performance objectives. You have to complete 4 of these 17. You can complete these objectives in any order. It's not designed to be done in order. We would recommend that you choose the technical objectives that best align to your role, because in that case, it'll be much easier to achieve the performance objectives if you're doing them in your everyday work. Because you have to do 4 objectives, you'll have noticed that you have to pick from more than one area. So that will help you gain a good range of experience. But if you choose an objective from one area, you don't have to complete all of the objectives from that area. You can pick and choose any 4 from there. We often find that trainees are drawn towards the tax or the audit objectives if they've particularly enjoyed the exams, if you can enjoy those exams, or you've been good at those exams. We find that people tend to move towards them. You should probably only choose these objectives if you're working in a specific audit or tax role. Just because the level of experience you would need to achieve those objectives means you'll be needing to be working on audits or in a tax environment on a regular basis. If you're not, then probably better to go to other technical objectives which better map across to the work that you're doing on a regular basis. I've said a bit about performance objectives. There are 3 parts to it. There's the description. There are 5 elements which outline the kinds of tasks and behaviours that you would have to demonstrate to achieve the performance objective. And there's a statement between 200 and 500 words where you have to summarise how you've achieved the objective's description. You don't need to write about all the elements in your statement, just how you met the description of the objective overall. A few tips then. I used to manage the team that conducted the PER audits, and believe me, we don't want to read pages of irrelevant statements any more than you want to spend your free time writing them. What we want is for you to write just enough and for it all to be relevant. With that in mind, then what should you write in your statement? As I said there, you don't need to write about every element in your statement, just summarise your experience to meet the description of the objective. The best way to do that is a three-step process. Firstly, explain what you did. So give an example of a task that you've worked on. Secondly, describe the skills that you gained which helped you achieve the objective. And lastly, reflect on what you learned. What went well? What would you do differently next time? I would say use at least one example for each objective and avoid repeating information that you've used for a previous performance objective. Try to give your supervisor a different example because the most common reason that supervisors reject an objective or for applications to fail a PER audit is because there are not enough examples to demonstrate the breadth of experience that you've got. If just imagine if you met somebody and every time you met them they were wearing the same shirt or the same outfit, you would start to think they've only got one outfit. And that's what can happen here. If you're continually using the same thing that happened, people will start to think that you don't have the real depth of experience that we need. We've only maybe experienced something once and not as a repeated thing. I'd say make sure that you say what you did. Use the word I as much as you can. Sometimes trainees will write sentences like, in my organisation, this happened or that happens, when they actually mean, in my organisation, I did this or I did that. This isn't the time for false modesty. Make sure you're clear in your statement that you carried out a task or an activity and what you learned from it because it's your experience. If you're part of a project, I would say just take out the part that you did in that project and don't bother writing about what everyone else did. Focus on yourself when you're writing the statement.
I think this is something I get asked a lot, Gordon, from students. Obviously, if any employers are watching this, listening, we would want confidentiality upheld. So don't feel when you're writing the statement you need to mention people's names or business names other than your employer, obviously. But try and make it as detailed with the specifics of what you did as possible. I agree with Gordon 100% there. Write it in the first person will really, really help. Everything should be, I did this, I learned this. If I did it again, this is what I would do differently. This is what went well. And I really think they are a lot worse in students' heads than they are when you actually get going. I think the first one of these is the hardest. Gordon, I agree with you 100%. Once you use a structure for the objectives, I think it gives you a nice pattern to follow and pick one that you are most comfortable with on the list. You don't need to do them in order. And once you get the first one done, I promise you the second one and the third one will flow much, much more easily.
It's amazing how often you speak to trainees and they say, oh wow, I could never write 500 words on that. But actually, if you take those 3 points and you apply them to each of the 5 elements that are there, suddenly you'll find that those 200 words will disappear really quickly. I would say you should be able to get your first one done in half an hour to an hour in terms of actually thinking about it, writing it down and getting it on the system if you're following those objectives. And half an hour to an hour isn't too long, I would say. I know it's probably more than you would want to be doing it ideally, but if you think about that for each of those objectives that you have to do over 3 years, it's actually not a huge amount of time and it will get easier as you go along. Okay, now we'll take a look at practical experience supervisors because I think this is the question we get asked most often. You will need to have both your performance objectives and your time in a relevant role signed off by a practical experience supervisor. The objectives can be submitted in any order, and you will be reminded to submit your time to your supervisor when you end date a role or reach 36 months. First question then is, what do supervisors actually do? The main thing they need to do is to support you. They should help you to identify which performance objectives you should target, maybe setting a target date by which you should achieve them. They'll help you to plan out the experience you need to get those performance objectives. So this might mean arranging job rotations or project work or secondment just to get you that range of experience that you need to get into different categories. They should work with you to see if you need any personal development as well, just to get to the necessary level. That could be training or research or additional coaching. Work shadowing is really good for this. But they are the people in charge of your progress, and they need to regularly evaluate your progress against your PER. At the end of the day, they will be the person who will sign it off as well. So they need to be happy that you've met all of the requirements. It's a hugely important role, and in a lot of senses, we have at ACCA devolved the main decision making over whether or not somebody has met the requirements to the supervisors themselves. It's a position of significant responsibility. As a result, we tend to say that for performance objectives anyway, a supervisor has to be a qualified accountant or auditor who's a member of an IFAC member body or who's recognised by law in their country of work. IFAC is the International Federation of Accountants. It includes member bodies from all over the world. In the UK, you're talking about ACCA, ICAEW, ICAS, CIMA, SIPFA. I think that's most of them. So if they're a member of any of those accountancy bodies, then they are able to be your supervisor. They don't need to be an ACCA member, just a member of any IFAC body. Most trainees will be in a position where their line manager is a qualified accountant. So that will mean they will have one person signing off all of their experience. But not everyone's in that situation. So ACCA policy in this is flexible. Trainees can have multiple supervisors depending on their circumstances. A supervisor doesn't need to be qualified to sign off the time element. So if your direct line manager isn't qualified, they can still sign off your time. The reason for this is because in some cases, the best people to actually approve the time are the HR department, who are rarely qualified accountants. So as long as they work in the same organisation as you, they can approve the time that you've spent there. If your line manager is not qualified, then when it comes to the performance objectives, you will need to find a second qualified supervisor to work with your line manager to sign them off. Now, this could be an accountant working at the same company. It could be a manager in a different department. It could be an external auditor or a consultant if your company's got those to bring in. They will need to have a working relationship with you and with your supervisor. They will have to supervise you to some capacity to verify the experience is true. Ideally, we'd have them meeting regularly with you and your line manager to discuss your progress. If you're in that situation, there's a booklet available called Become a Practical Experience Supervisor. It's available on our website, and you can give that to a potential supervisor, help them understand what's involved. Once you've decided on who your supervisor should be, you'll need to send an invitation to them and get them to register in My Experience before you can send them in any PER. To register your supervisor, you add them to the role details, give them some basic information, and then we will send them an email invitation based on that. The bit I've highlighted here is just one of the occasions when things can go a little bit wrong. The relationship you choose in this box will determine what your supervisor can sign off, because only qualified accountants can approve performance objectives and only supervisors from your organisation can verify your time. So if you select somebody as an IFAC qualified accountant from outside your organisation, they can sign off performance objectives but not time. If you put someone down there as a non-IFAC qualified person from within your organisation, they can only sign off time, not performance objectives. So if you're having issues where a supervisor is not able to sign off something, that's probably the bit I would suggest having a look at first. A quick word on approved employers. Some of you will be working for approved employers. Those are organisations where ACCA has assessed that the level of training and support they provide to their trainees is sufficient to meet the PER, and they've got suitable learning and development processes in place. This will allow trainees to get, if it's gold or platinum level, I should say, to claim the performance objective exemption, only at the employer's discretion though. I would check this out with your HR manager, finance manager, or with us and do the approved employer database, because some approved employers are set up for professional development, which only applies to members. Some of them are set up for only specific offices or specific roles which count. So it might be you might work for an employer that is an approved employer, but your role might not necessarily be approved. So that's worth checking. You do still need to meet the minimum of 36 months of relevant work experience. You do still need to use the recording tool to record the information. You do still need to tell us that you're working for an approved employer. The exemption is just from recording the performance objectives within the PER tool. It's not an exemption from PER at all. And we find that a lot with people who work with approved employers. They have a perception that they don't have to do it. They do have to do it, and it's best to engage with the process as early as you can. This is the form you would need to fill in. I'm not going to cover this just now, but just to show you that there is a form that you would need to fill in electronically and get signed off by your approved employer. Don't think we've quite got time to cover the ethics and professional skills module, except to say this is part of the new ethics focus that we've got. It takes about 15 hours to complete. You'll have to do it before you get ACCA membership, and you might find that by doing it, you improve your chances of getting a role. If you're looking for support, the affiliate section of the website will give you PER guides, which will give you huge detail. There's a quick guide if you don't have time to read the full one. There's some in video formats, there's text formats. There's a whole load of stuff there, including a performance objective guide, which is absolutely comprehensive and will tell you in great detail exactly what you need to do to meet each performance objective. We also have our competency framework, which is available on the website, and that will help you decide which performance objectives to choose for your PER, because it shows the link between the performance objective and the jobs in finance. If you're working in a particular role, it will suggest to you what performance objectives you should be focusing on. If you're looking for a relevant accounting or finance role to start with your PER, or if you want to move roles to gain more experience, check out ACCA Careers. There are 50,000 or so accounting and finance jobs available from all around the world on that. They're in every sector, in pretty much every country in the world, and at every level. It also provides lots of careers advice. If you're not sure about writing a CV or succeeding at an interview or how to use social media, then a lot of information is available there. You can also upload your CV so recruiters and employers can find you as well proactively.
Gordon, thank you so much for that roundup. I have recorded the session, so I'll send it out as a recording link. And Gordon's kindly said we can make these slides available for people as well. When I send it, I was noting down a couple of bits. You mentioned a document link for being a supervisor. I'll pop that on the email, Gordon, if you could send me the link for that. So anyone who is a supervisor, or when you are approaching someone to be your supervisor, I think it's nice and courteous to give them that link and say, look, this is what you are signing up to. We'll also see if we can get the link to the database of improved employers on there. From my perspective, one of the main things I've seen is the link with this and your career progression. And when I was working in practice, we used to make the PER sign-off part of the regular appraisal process for the organisation. And so I would encourage you to think about doing your PER in line with your workplace appraisal. I know every employer is slightly different there. Some might do annual appraisals, some 6 monthly, some even more regularly than that. But if you can make it part of those regular catch-ups with a line manager and go and get another 1 or 2 objectives signed off, that's great. It also gives you a great opportunity to go to that appraisal meeting with the performance objectives that you are yet to complete and ask your current employer, can I get some experience in this particular area because I'm going to need it to complete my PER. As we've been talking through, some guys have been putting questions into the chat box. So Gordon, not to put you on the spot, but a couple of them particularly linked to the Level 7 apprenticeship scheme, which is used by a number of our employers and students now to complete ACCA. The first one I think I can answer, but I'll get sign off from you. With regards to completing the PER, just because you are an apprentice and you have to do your end of project report at the EPA stage, you would still have to fully complete the performance objectives for PER. There's no exemption from PER for apprentices. I'm right in that, Gordon, aren't I?
Yeah, that's correct. It's not an exemption from doing the PER. The PER can be seen as quite a useful thing for an apprentice, because if you're just at the stage where you're building up your knowledge and your experience in accounting and finance, what I would say is have a look at the performance objectives and make sure that what you're learning actually covers what would be expected for you in there. So actually use it as a framework for your personal and professional development, rather than just something that you have to do as part of ACCA. If you can turn it around and actually make it something that will help you progress, because it gives you targets to go for, then yeah, I would suggest that's probably the best way to look at it.
And the second question relevant for apprentices with regards to the hours of employment and putting that detail in to build up your 36 months, my understanding is it would be your contracted employment hours. So you take that from your contract of employment, and that would include, therefore, the 20% time for study leave given to apprentices. But Gordon, I don't know that's a technical question. I'm not sure if you're fully aware of the complete ins and outs of that one.
Yeah, the apprenticeship thing is interesting. I would say there's an element when you're putting in your hours, you can indicate if it's part-time. So if you are working 1 day a week, then you can put in that you work essentially 1 day a week, or seven hours per week, and that will then just start recording them now and start totting up your hours. So that's the way I would do it. Otherwise, I think you're possibly getting into, if you worked full-time somewhere else, for example, and you had another role that you did part-time, say you've got 2 part-time jobs, you can put both of them in, but anything that's not relevant, don't put it into PER at all.
And I very rarely come across any students that don't meet the 36 monthly requirement. That one is just obviously a matter of time. You can't rush it through, but usually doing study alongside a workplace scenario, particularly if you've had that previous workplace experience where maybe you were studying AAT or before you started your ACCA studies, the 36 months is very rarely a problem for any students that approach me with that question. Another question in the chat box, this one's a bit more specific with regards to the IFAC requirement for the supervisor to sign off. Talking about an insolvency practitioner. Now, my understanding is most insolvency practitioners have probably also got an accounting qualification that underpins it. So I would go to the individual first and ask them, are they also an ACA or an ACCA qualified? Because that's quite often the route into insolvency practitioning. If they haven't got that, I think your best bet would be to contact the ACCA directly with their qualification, and they can then look it up on a database to see whether they are a member of a required IFAC body.
Yeah, if somebody is an insolvency practitioner, they can be registered with something like the Institute of Insolvency Practitioners, and they may have used if they're ACCA or ACA, they may have used that to then get the insolvency qualification, and then they may have let their accountancy qualification lapse in theory. But I think in most cases, an insolvency practitioner would also be a member of ACA, ACCA, probably those two actually more than anything else. But yeah, worth checking with them. If they're not accountancy qualified at all, then they may be able to sign off some performance objectives, but that I think you're getting into, it'd be a bit of technicality there, and I think there will probably be another better way of getting it signed off than getting in with someone who is an insolvency practitioner that isn't accountancy qualified.
Thanks, Gordon. And just to confirm, both ACCA and ACA, the ICAEW, are IFAC membership bodies. So anyone there that has got someone at work that's either ACA or ACCA qualified, and I think, Gordon, you also had CIMA, and you mentioned SIPFA as well, being the main ones that you might come across someone in a workplace. Brilliant. Well, that's all the questions in the chat box. If anybody's got any final questions, please pop them in there. I can see a comment about the ethics, and that's something I will take back to the ACCA, Gordon, whether it's you or a colleague, but we would be more than up for running a separate session on the online ethics module, because that, alongside the PER, is something that all students have to complete, and we get lots of questions about it. It's not something that we provide a training course for, and there's not a session exam like the other modules of ACCA, but it is something that you have to do to get your certificate. So I will take that back to the ACCA and see if we can run a session purely on that ethics requirement for you all in due course. Watch this space.
Just to jump in, but when you talk about ethics, it is also ethics and professional skills module. It used to be just a professional ethics module. What we then did in 2017 is we spoke to employers and we asked them what the big skills that they wanted to see from people who were joining the organisation were. And those professional skills, communication, innovation, analysis, commercial ability, those kind of things are what are in the professional skills module. So I would look at it not just as an ethics module, but an ethics and professional skills module, which is going to give you really relevant work-based tips and skills that you can take back to your employer and show progress as well. I think it's worth doing, even if I know it's difficult to take the time to go and do something like this because 15 hours can feel like a lot, but it will give you skills that will help you in your workplace and will also probably help you find work if you're looking for that as well.
Fantastic. So to finish with, I think we'll end on the takeaways from the session. Gordon's kindly put together some bullet points on the screen to try and get you motivated to go and do it, because I appreciate, and I remember what it was like when I was a student. I'd probably listen to something like this and then put it off again for another 6 months because you get into the next round of exams. But I think up front there, to go and log into your My ACCA and find the pages Gordon has showed us on the screenshots today. So log into the recording call, make sure you know how to get onto it. Second one there, finding a practical experience supervisor. If you haven't got someone lined up, you need to speak to someone at work, speak to someone that supervises you and find out whether they can do it, whether they would be eligible and whether they would want to do it. In my experience, everybody says yes. I think it's something that's quite nice to be asked to do it. And I haven't ever come across any student that says, oh, my line manager has refused point blank to be my PER supervisor. But I think there is a right way to ask. So don't just register them on the website and get the email out of the blue from the ACCA. Take some common courtesy and go and ask them. As we mentioned, I will get the link for the Being a Supervisor guide that you can then share with them so they've got full knowledge of what they are signing up for. Third one from Gordon was target performance objectives. So I think look at the list, and that's something that is very daunting, isn't it, when you see the list of the mandatories and the 4 from the optional areas. But pick one that was in the slides today and think that's one I could do now and get going with it. Get going. The first one, as I said, is always the hardest. Update your progress as you go along, so make sure you are tracking everything you do. And guys that are studying under level 7 apprenticeship, you have got this in the background that you can then use to supplement your PER with. Although they are 2 separate things, you can clearly reuse some of the tasks that you have been doing and developing. And then finally, get it done. If you're sitting there having completed all of the exams, or you're coming up to your final exam, this is a great time to get it done. I believe too many students still leave it until they've got their final results to worry about this, and you can really get ahead by cracking on with it whilst you are studying. And this is the perfect time, as I know a number of our students are now waiting for results from the June session exams before they start thinking about booking their next exam for September. Gordon has put a link into the chat box, so go and look that one up. But I'm going to say thank you to Gordon. Thank you so much for joining us. The ACCA always come along and support us when we are running these sessions. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the clear slides and presentation and allowing us to record it so we can distribute it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and good luck to everyone for your exam results when they come out.
And I'm going to say thank you all for joining us at lunchtime today. And if you've got any questions or queries, you've got my contact details. More than happy for you to route them through me, and I can then hook them back up to the ACCA. But I'm also going to big up the ACCA. I think over the years, they've really developed their online guide for this kind of stuff. So when we send the slides, look at the links as well, because quite often there will be a nice question and answer on the website that answers the vast majority of questions that I see from PER. Thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.